we're talking data, I'm not just talking about the numbers you're getting, okay? I'm not just talking about pulling a lead list from CREsync, CoStar, Reonomy, PropStream, whatever, okay? It's about where specifically you're prospecting. Because a lot of us are prospecting sometimes in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes we're prospecting in areas that, you don't have great population growth, you don't have good household income numbers, you don't have any of the metrics in which investors are actually specifically looking for. Now, obviously in the state of New Jersey, where I'm from, it's a very densely populated area. The household income is a little bit higher, so it's a little bit skewed, right? But in areas like Texas, in areas like Florida, in areas like many of the states all around the country, where there are areas that you might live in, which is incredibly rural, right? Very suburban, which is very normal to live in. But the problem is that if you're just prospecting around where you live, you might be in a little bit of an area that might be a little bit too remote for specific investments. Think about if you were an investor. Let's just talk about, just open, broad, specific metrics. Nothing like super granular for a second. Let's just talk about very broad metrics. If you're looking to invest in an area, what type of population would you like to have? Minimum. Think about the population for a second. You can come off mute or drop in the chat box down below. Do you want to know what the average person is looking for in a 5-mile radius, investor-wise? What are we looking for in a 5-mile radius? What do you think? Obviously, it depends on a lot of factors, but I'm going to give you a quick range. Kevin says 20,000. What else we got? Any other guesses?
Cap rate.
What's the population? Arlene says 100,000 or more. Kevin says 100,000. Population in 5 miles, within 5-mile radius. The short answer is 100,000, right? So a lot of people are looking for 100,000 or more, okay? Very, very important factor, okay? Because a lot of people are looking in too small of a metro. Now, look, I'm going to be honest with you. If you have some very, very, maybe some more seasoned guys, people who like specific areas, 20,000 in a 1 mile might be okay, right? But 20,000 in a 5 mile, it's a little bit small, okay? Because I want you to understand something for a second, okay? Let's do this. I'm going to go on Reonomy just for a quick second, just so you can kind of get a reference point for a moment. Give me 1 minute. I'm going to open up a new tab. Let's do Reonomy. Okay, and then let's do, so just to give you some reference points, okay? Like, not because this doesn't have population on here, but other software do. So obviously for the state of Florida, there's going to be some areas, right? Like the southeast area of Florida, Miami, greater Miami area, this MSA, just even from West Palm down to, down to Miami, very high household income. However, if you go to other areas in the middle of Florida, anywhere here, right, you're going to have a very different household income number. You're also going to have very different population density, right? Like here, the population density is a lot higher than, middle of Florida, or even just a little bit out west, right? So even if you go, and like my wife likes to ride horses up and around, this area, right? Like on the west inside here. Out here is very rural. So it's like if you start looking at properties as an example, let's say you lived out in these areas, it's like, okay, well, what happens is that these areas, so you prospect it, but you don't realize that your price point and your population density is going to be very low, right? Especially if you start prospecting up this way, you start looking in the population areas here, like you might live out here in the central Florida. Like, again, I'm just going to zoom in some random market and I want to show you an understanding just so you can get a decent scope of size, right? Like if you have less than 100,000 people in this density, right? This is 5 miles. If you have less than 100,000 people in this density, that's going to be a problem when you're working with investors. So just keep in mind that like you want around 100,000 people in a 5-mile radius, roughly, to know that you have a strong, growing, decent market to invest in. Because if this size of a radius has like 15,000 people, that is tiny. Now watch this, right? Let me give you another example. In Florida, you're probably not going to have the population issue, but where you could have it, New York. I have a bunch of people who send me deals in New York. Reonomy is freaking the heck out right now. This is insanity. Where they'll send me a deal up here, northern New York, where they'll, again, 5-mile radius. Let's just do it right here. Okay. They'll send me a deal out like somewhere like this. Okay. They send me a deal like that. Do you see that in a 5-mile radius, there's only 107 total properties? That is a tiny, tiny, tiny little area. And they're like, I can't find a buyer for it. No shit. Because you're calling in the middle of nowhere. This is why one key factor I want you to be thinking about is what my population, population number is in a 5-mile radius. Because if you're calling in the middle of nowhere, okay, which you can easily just go on Google, which you guys should be able to still see my screen here, right? Population 5-mile radius, and then type in a zip code. Someone give me a zip code. It's somewhere where some area that you live. Just say it out loud. 9,000 people. Very small. 5-mile radius is about 9,000 people. This is an area where you're probably going to have some difficulty in trying to sell some deals. Now, who wants to give me another radius? Another zip code. Someone else put in the chat, I think. I just closed it for a second. All right, Arlene, let's go with yours. Thank you. Household income, population 583,000 people. Huge populations, right? Like very, like this is going to be a much easier ability to sell deals. Population 71,000, in this zip code in 2020. I mean, which is obviously higher now, right? This is going to be a much easier area, and I know the area well. I mean, this is going to be a much easier area to sell deals because you're going to have a lot of movement in this property. Give me another zip code. Well, there is. Let's go. Okay, zip code here, population. In just this zip code, you have 67,000 people, which covers 13.6 miles. That's insanity. I mean, the greater Orlando area is going to be this is a great market. Your 5-mile radius, which, by the way, CoStar, if you're wondering, is probably the best place that you can find all this data, right? If you just type in CoStar and you can pull up reports pretty easily. Like if you just did, let's do the same one, 32822. So you can look up zip codes in these different areas, pull up any property you want. As an example, you can pull up a 5-mile radius. So you can literally just pull up a property right around the corner from your house, and CoStar will give you those. But this is just to give you some really rough numbers. So just keep in mind, if you're in a really in a much smaller population density, keep in mind you're gonna have a lot more trouble doing that. Okay, now this is just one part of it. Now next, okay, Jose, I'm just gonna use your zip code. We'll do a couple other ones in a second. Next one is household income, HHI, household income. So what's gonna happen here is I'm gonna talk about this in a second. But what do you think is a household income average, for a minimum in an area you want to invest in? What is an area that most investors are looking for? Roughly, household income.
60,000.
Okay, guess is 60,000. Any other guesses? 100K. Any other guesses? Done once, done twice. Yeah, answer 60 grand, right? So 60,000 bucks. So what happens is you're looking for population areas within a 5-mile radius of 100,000, household income above 60 grand. Now, what does this do? What does this actually do for you as an investor and as a broker? What does this actually do?
Shows you where to look, for potential deals.
Yeah. Agreed. What else does it do? When you find these areas and you look up household income and you look up population, right, within a 5-mile radius, what else is this giving you? This gives you where to look.
I would think your rental rates in the area would be above a certain point, so you're, in the buildings should be I don't know. It's not like D areas or C areas.
100%. Yeah. Look, this gives you the highest likelihood of investing in an asset that should be in an area where the population's growing, the income is growing, it's at a steady basis, right? Where you're going to be investing in a property, investing in an area where you should have the easiest path to success when it comes to a transaction. That's what we want. And it's obviously, as an investor, we want to make some decent money. As an investor, we look at these areas and this is risk tolerance. Okay? Because if you look at a metro, and that metro has, let's say, 15,000 people in a 5-mile radius, and it has a household income average of $32,000, what kind of risk, what are you thinking when you see that? When somebody sends you a deal, again, household income of 32 grand, population of 15, okay, in a 5-mile radius, what goes through your head as an investor? What do you think? If you were the investor, what would you think?
Terrible tenants.
Okay, not great tenants. Okay, what else? Country town? What else? What else does it make you think of? Even if, by the way, the deal was an 8 cap, a 9 cap, a 10 cap, a good price per square foot, what are you thinking?
Not going to increase in value.
Probably not going to increase in value. Maybe how he says no tenancy. It's going to be hard to get tenants. People won't be able to afford what you build, right? If you build, or, maybe you can't increase, not enough income. Maybe you can't increase the rents. It's a high risk area. I mean, guys, I've looked at deals that were 14 plus caps. Great price per square foot, unbelievable price per units in super rural areas. People don't want it because they're terrified. Because if in those deals, what happens if somebody goes vacant? I've looked at population numbers, and sometimes it was less than 1,000 in a zip code. That's terrifying. I don't care what asset class. Who's going to live there, right? Who's living there, and then who's shopping there, right? Who does business there? If your population is very low and your income levels are low, this is a huge red flag. I don't have something red around me. Okay, this is the closest thing I got to red around me. Okay, pretend this is a flag. It's a huge red flag, people, that you probably shouldn't invest there. You want strong demographics, and not enough people see that as a key metric when they're prospecting.